An armed gang stormed into a bank. After subduing the manager, they quickly took away 32 million US dollars. However, just as they were about to leave, they discovered that the special forces had been lying in ambush outside the door for a long time. Among these people was a very distinctive figure, William, a former soldier who had achieved many remarkable military feats. Not long ago, his wife fell seriously ill. Ironically, despite serving in the army for many years, the family's savings were still not enough to cover the enormous medical expenses. He had always believed that he had given his all for the country, but when he called the relevant government agency to request state medical assistance, the other party bluntly hung up on him. The reason was that he had not paid his insurance on time. William could not accept this result. He thought of the country he had sworn to protect to the end, yet when he faced his most difficult moment, it turned its back on him with indifference. What made him even more desperate was that the bank now sent a notice of debt. If he could not pay the mortgage, they would be evicted from their home next month. In fact, for William, it would not matter if he himself suffered a bit. The important thing was that he still had a seriously ill wife and a very young son.
I lose faith in this world on a daily basis. Not in you, though.
In his desperation, he turned to his older brother, Dany. Dany was a bit surprised when William came to him. The two had not been in contact for many years, for the simple reason that they had gone their separate ways. In fact, William was originally an orphan. When he was young, he was adopted by Dany's parents. Perhaps because of an inferiority complex, William had always been shy and timid in everything since childhood. In contrast, Dany had a reckless and defiant personality. This led to a great difference in their outlook on life. Therefore, when they grew up, William chose to join the army, while Dany became a professional criminal. If life had not forced him into a corner, William would never have imagined asking Dany for help, not even in his dreams. When he first arrived, he saw the entire garage filled with luxury cars. He thought that over the years, Dany had been doing well in business, but unexpectedly, his life was not that good either. It turned out that most of these cars were stolen or smuggled. However, due to the recent sluggish market, none of the cars could be sold. Therefore today, Dany was preparing to carry out a big job. He laid out his plan to rob $32 million in cash from the federal bank in the city center. Coincidentally, the gang was currently short one person, and William's joining was just enough to fill the vacancy. Upon hearing the word bank, William immediately refused, but then he thought of his wife and child waiting at home. Even if he kept to his moral boundaries, the government would not help him. In the end, William decided to take part in the bank robbery, but with one condition: that no one was to be killed. Dany assured him that it was not a big problem. With William's agreement, Dany immediately got to work. He gathered the other members to check their weapons. 5 minutes later, the whole group was ready to act. According to the pre-arranged plan, they quietly set their operation in motion. The group disguised themselves and entered the bank's elevator, quickly subduing the employees. At that moment, a police officer arrived to handle some business. To avoid suspicion, Dany pretended to be the bank manager and opened the door.
Oh, we're just doing a transfer in the back. It's procedure. I'll let you in 20 minutes.
He said that everyone was preparing for a cash transfer, and it might take another half an hour before the bank could operate again. He intended to use this as an excuse to send the police officer away, but the officer said he was not there for work. With no other choice, Dany let him in. It turned out this police officer had his eye on a female employee named Kim and wanted to invite her to dinner. However, from Kim's unnatural expression, he quickly realized something was wrong, but it was already too late. Dany swiftly pulled out his gun, using Kim's life to threaten him not to make any rash moves.
These are the decisions that matter in life, so let me give you all the information before you decide. Okay? I have 2 guns, fully auto. One's aimed at you and the other one's at Kim, your girlfriend. And I have you, the tellers, and 9 employees in the back and your partner outside. And it's up to you to make sure that they are all safe. Kind of a heavy burden. I need you to nod if you understand, officer. Now take your fucking hand off the weapon, give me a big smile, and wave at your partner.
Facing the threat, the officer Victor could only comply. He waved his hand to signal to his colleague Officer Mark, who was standing outside the door, that everything was fine. Taking advantage of the moment, the group broke into the vault and stuffed all the cash into backpacks. But just as they were about to leave, Mark, with his many years of police experience, sensed something unusual. Even worse, the driver who was supposed to pick them up had caught Mark's attention. With no other option, he had to pretend the car had broken down to narrowly escape. But when his accomplices carrying the money stepped outside, it was exactly when Mark saw them holding Victor hostage. Seeing this, Mark immediately drew his gun and fired back. A major shootout between the police and the robbers robbers officially began. At the same time, the driver rammed through the barricade and charged in, and the robbers inside the bank also rushed outside. The two sides quickly engaged in an intense gun battle. Nearby police officers hearing the gunfire immediately came to assist. It turned out that the Federal Bureau of Investigation had already received rumors about a bank robbery. Since they were not certain which bank would be targeted, they had recently increased patrols. Realizing the situation was unfavorable, Dany quickly took William, who was holding Victor hostage, and ran toward the back exit. The robbers had not expected the police to arrive so quickly. Within minutes, they were surrounded. The driver even panicked, ramming and killing an accomplice before having his own head blown apart by a sniper. Facing police pressure from all sides, the robbers were unable to fight back. Meanwhile, Dany and William reached the garage, only to find that all the exits had been sealed off. This was William's first time doing something like this, so he could not avoid feeling tense. While the two were still disoriented, Victor suddenly grabbed a gun and resisted. This made William, already in a panic, even more flustered. He fired 2 shots, wounding Victor. This action shocked Dany greatly, but with no way back, the two could only look for another route to keep fleeing. Not long after the special forces finished dealing with the robbers upstairs, they immediately entered the bank to hunt down the remaining suspects. Cornered, Dany decided to risk everything to break through. Mark finally found Victor, whose condition was already critical. Fortunately, there was always an ambulance on standby nearby. Paramedic Camille received the call and immediately headed with her driver's assistant straight to the bank's basement. Upon arrival, she quickly examined the wounds, swiftly bandaged them to stop the bleeding, and prepared to rush him to the hospital. Unexpectedly, just as the ambulance had traveled a short distance, Dany spotted it. At once, he came up with a way to escape. While Camille was fully focused on treating the wounded, Dany suddenly burst out.
Get out!
This startled the newly hired trainee driver, who had no time to react or understand what was happening before Dany dragged him out of the vehicle. Then Dany told William to change into the driver's clothes, planning to use the ambulance to slip past the police and escape. However, just as the vehicle reached the garage exit, it was blocked by a police car. William shouted that there was an injured police officer. The police, half believing, half doubting, opened the door to check. Hearing this, Dany immediately hid behind a cloth, threatening Camille not to make a sound. Seeing a police officer lying on the stretcher in need of urgent care, the special forces asked no further questions and let them pass. After that, William ripped out the vehicle's tracking device. He thought to himself that as long as they reached the extraction point in the suburbs, their future life would surely soar like a kite in the wind. But reality never goes according to plan. Mark quickly discovered that the driver had been knocked unconscious. Learning that the ambulance had been hijacked, he immediately reported the situation to headquarters via radio. He called for reinforcements to gather there. A few minutes later, the operation commander captain arrived at the scene. After hearing Mark's summary of the situation, he immediately deployed helicopters to search the entire city. Unaware of any of this, William was still driving the ambulance wildly toward the suburbs. A helicopter circled overhead and stopped right above them. Once the ambulance was spotted from the helicopter, they would certainly be captured here today. The worst part was that it was still quite a distance to the suburbs, and the ambulance was far too easy to detect. While the two brothers were discussing a countermeasure, Victor, who was unconscious in the back seat, suddenly woke up. Seeing this, Camille quickly urged him not to speak. At the same time, she opened the door slightly to secretly observe the surroundings. Spotting a fire extinguisher inside the car, Camille immediately came up with an idea. She rushed into the driver's seat and aimed the extinguisher directly at the two men. Taking advantage of their unpreparedness, she quickly opened the back door and jumped out. But she had underestimated the situation. Before she could run even 10 meters, Dany had already gotten out of the vehicle with his gun and aimed it at her. As Camille was at a loss for what to do under the threat, the heart rate monitor in the ambulance suddenly gave off a warning sound. Hearing this, William immediately ordered Camille to get back in the vehicle. With no other choice, she reluctantly complied. It turned out that because too much time had been delayed, Victor had begun to show signs of low blood pressure. If he did not receive timely treatment, he would die. Once Victor died while in their custody, under local law, it would be considered a first-degree offense. The two brothers would certainly be sentenced to death, but they did not expect that the air units had already located the position of the ambulance. Captain immediately organized his forces, directing ground police to coordinate with the air police to encircle and capture them. Moments later, a swarm of police cars rushed to the intersections, setting up a blockade to trap the ambulance. But because there were still two hostages in the vehicle, the captain ordered his subordinates not to block the vehicle too aggressively. This was to avoid driving the robbers into a corner and provoking them to harm the hostages. After surveying the surrounding terrain, the captain decided to herd the ambulance into a nearby construction site. Police cars tightened the encirclement from all four sides. However, they did not know that William was an exceptionally skilled driver, even better than ordinary Special Forces members. Although the police vehicles had superior equipment after a long pursuit, they still failed to gain the upper hand. Just when William thought he had finally shaken off the police, a second wave of police surged in from the front to block him. With no other option, he had to turn the vehicle around and continue his frenzied escape. At this moment, the most urgent matter was that Victor suddenly went into cardiac arrest. Without an assistant, Camille could not manage alone, so she had no choice but to temporarily enlist Dany as her assistant. Dany was of course very displeased, but if Victor died, his own charges would only become more severe. Reluctantly, he moved to the back to help. The pressing problem now was that Victor had lost too much blood. Without a timely transfusion, he could not be saved. Fortunately, William had type O blood. In the critical moment, they had no choice but to turn him into a living blood bank. With Camille's extensive first aid experience, and with Dany's assistance, she finally pulled Victor back from the brink of death. Meanwhile, William was still locked in a battle of wits with the police. A convoy of police cars was closing in behind the ambulance, quickly forcing William into a tight spot. In a moment of danger, he quickly used the ambulance's body to block the view of the police cars behind. He then slammed the accelerator and sped straight into a dead-end road ahead. When they were about to crash into the cliff wall, he suddenly slammed on the brakes. This caused the police cars behind to be unable to avoid colliding head-on with the mound in front. Thinking the danger had been eliminated, they did not expect that more and more police cars would continue the chase. If the pursuit went on like this, their chances of escape would be almost zero. At that moment, Dany suddenly came up with an idea. It turned out that in order to be able to depart quickly, hospital ambulances usually kept a spare key on the fuel cap of each vehicle. Given the current situation, Dany immediately called Underworld boss Clark. He told him that he was being chased by the police and wanted him to send people to help him escape. Clark originally did not want to get involved, as offending the police would bring him no benefit, but Dany directly offered him $8 million to tempt him. Hearing that amount, Clark was instantly moved. He immediately gathered his men to take action. Dany told Clark to first steal an ambulance, then drive it to the predetermined spot under the bridge and wait for instructions. He then contacted an underling at an auto repair shop, telling him to bring green paint and a saw to wait near the cliffside of that bridge. Meanwhile, the police decided they had to act quickly, as rush hour was approaching. If they did not end the arrest soon, many innocent people could be caught up in it. The bank robbery had already attracted the attention of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Using the facial recognition system at the scene, the agents identified the ringleader as Dany. He was a dangerous criminal who had participated in multiple bank robberies in California. Agent Jock immediately informed Captain that the FBI would intervene in this arrest. As for Captain, he quickly formulated a plan. He immediately deployed officers to block the surrounding streets. He ordered the police tailing the target to accelerate and catch the ambulance before rush hour. William quickly saw through their intentions. While the two brothers were discussing a countermeasure, the police through the Cybercrime Administration connected to the radio system in the ambulance. Captain immediately spoke to Dany and William. He promised that if they released the two hostages, the police would withdraw all helicopters and ground forces. However, Dany was no fool. If he released the hostages, he would no longer have any leverage, and his death might come even faster. Therefore, he ignored Captain's exchange conditions and continued with the original plan, heading toward the bridge. William floored the accelerator, intending to rush out of the logistics center ahead. Without the plot armor of a main character, the police were quickly left behind. In such a complex terrain, even the slightest mistake could mean the vehicle smashed and people killed. After a high-speed life-or-death chase, in the end, only Mark persisted in keeping close behind the ambulance. Captain also realized that William's driving skills were far from ordinary, so he immediately ordered all exits to be sealed off. To reach the appointed bridge more quickly, Dany grabbed Camille, opened the back door, and threatened Mark not to make any rash moves. Captain feared that Dany in a panic might act recklessly, so in the end, he still ordered everyone to pull back. In this way, William successfully drove out of the garage, temporarily, shaking off the police. But they did not expect a greater danger to be approaching. Camille suddenly noticed there was a large amount of blood on the floor. Looking more closely, she saw that Victor, whose wound had previously been stabilized, had started bleeding heavily again. Seeing this, Camille quickly removed his shirt and found that the gunshot wound in his abdomen was rapidly worsening. If the bullet was not removed in time through surgery, Victor would not survive for more than an hour. But going to a hospital now would mean surrendering themselves, something Dany would never agree to. Therefore, after weighing the pros and cons, he decided to have Camille operate right there in the ambulance. The problem was that Camille had never performed surgery before, and certainly certainly not in such a crude environment. While Camille urged William to drive to the hospital, Dany took her phone and called a doctor colleague at the hospital. He intended to have an experienced doctor guide Camille remotely on how to remove the bullet. Unexpectedly, the one who answered was Colin, Camille's ex-boyfriend from years ago. The two had not been in contact for more than 6 months, and this sudden call greatly surprised Colin. Camille immediately explained the situation to him, stating outright that she was a hostage in the bank robbery. After hearing her out, Colin realized the matter was far from simple. He quickly connected with 2 other trauma surgery colleagues to assist. Since William had previous experience treating wounds on the battlefield in Iraq, he suggested switching places. Dany could then move to the back and help Camille handle the injury. Fortunately, besides anesthetics, the ambulance was fully equipped with all the other necessary surgical tools. At the same time, Captain monitoring the situation saw that they were preparing for surgery. He immediately instructed the police cars behind to keep their distance, ensuring the ambulance's safety throughout the procedure. Under the video guidance of the surgeons, Camille carefully made an incision in the abdomen. She then worked with William to retract the skin and muscle. She reached inside to press on the aorta to stop the blood from flowing into the spleen. Next, Camille began feeling for the bullet's location. At first, everything went smoothly. When she finally found the bullet, she realized it had not deviated at all and had struck directly into the fragile spleen. This was an extremely rare situation, one that even 2 highly experienced specialists seldom encountered. Most importantly, Victor's vital signs were steadily declining. If not dealt with quickly, he would certainly die. Just as Camille steeled herself to remove the bullet, Victor, who had been unconscious, suddenly woke up. With no anesthesia, the side of his abdomen cut open, and the intense pain caused him to thrash uncontrollably. To prevent the organs from rupturing, William knocked him out with a single punch. The good news was that Victor finally lay still. The bad news was that the worst-case scenario occurred. Just as Camille was about to remove the bullet, the spleen ruptured. In an instant, blood sprayed everywhere, and to make matters worse, the laptop battery died, cutting off Camille's direct connection to the surgeons. Having never witnessed such a scene before, Camille immediately panicked. Fortunately, William, who had faced life-and-death situations on the battlefield, quickly found a clamp. He temporarily sealed the blood vessel in time to stop the bleeding. Meanwhile, Clark had completed his part of the plan. Because the video call had been cut off at the last moment. When Captain contacted Colin to ask about the situation, everyone assumed that Victor had unfortunately died. At that moment, a call came in from higher command. Under pressure, Captain decided to initiate the final confrontation. He arranged for multiple sniper teams to be stationed along the routes the ambulance would have to take. Unexpectedly, these snipers were so poor in their aim that they not only failed to help, but also caused considerable losses to the ground police. William seized the opportunity, yanking the steering wheel and charging straight into the oncoming lane. With his exceptional driving skills, he managed to shake off all the police cars. Seeing this, Captain immediately dispatched 2 unmarked police vehicles to tail them from a distance of 500 feet. However, they did not know that Dany had previously studied the FBI's techniques and the Los Angeles police pursuit strategies in detail. Moreover, the recent actions of the police had completely enraged him, so he decided to give them a lesson. At that moment, Captain tried to contact Camille, wanting her to act as an informant to help capture the criminals. Unexpectedly, Dany overheard the entire conversation. In his anger, he intended to shoot Camille, but William realized that things would only get worse. Without hesitation, he used the swaying of the vehicle to save Camille, which led to an argument with Dany. During the disagreement, the two ended up fighting. In the end, Dany could not withstand William's attack and was forced to stop. After that, the two continued discussing their next move. At this point, as long as they could shake off the helicopter above them, they still had a chance to escape. So William immediately drove toward the Los Angeles River. While Captain and the others were still puzzled, Dany stepped out holding a gun. The helicopter, seeing this, quickly descended. Following Captain's orders, they attempted to threaten the two men. As soon as the helicopter flew closer, Dany grabbed a rifle and fired wildly. He then quickly jumped back into the vehicle to lure the helicopter. The surrounding terrain gave him an excellent opportunity. Dany easily shot down the low-flying helicopter. Soon after, 2 aircraft in succession were hit and were forced to return to headquarters. With no other choice, Captain continued deploying officers. He set up blockades at all nearby intersections while waiting for the next wave of air support. A short while later, the ambulance finally arrived under the bridge. The auto shop underling had been waiting there for a long time. In just 45 seconds, he had given the ambulance a new exterior. After that, Clark's men drove 2 identical ambulances in opposite directions at the same time. This left Captain and his team stunned, and they could only split their forces to give chase. At this point, he was completely being led by the nose. After all, the nearby police had been lured away. William drove a small white car out of the lot toward the suburbs. To prevent the police from pursuing them again, Dany had specifically instructed Clark to pack one of the 2 ambulances full of C4 explosives. That ambulance was now speeding straight toward a crowd of police officers at an intersection. Captain arrived at the scene afterward and immediately began organizing rescue operations. However, before they could even begin, another vehicle suddenly rushed in. The mounted machine gun on it, controlled remotely, sprayed bullets wildly into the crowd. Amid the chaos, Captain was unfortunately hit and killed. In the end, this meticulously planned pursuit had to be suspended at the cost of heavy casualties on the police side. At this moment, Mark, regaining consciousness after the shockwave from the explosion, happened to spot one of Clark's men sneaking nearby. Without hesitation, he gave chase. The man was quickly pinned to the ground, but as Mark and he struggled, the man's gun accidentally discharged, shooting himself in the head. It turned out this was none other than Clark's only son. The live news broadcast was airing the chase, and when Clark saw this scene, he could no longer contain himself. This unexpected incident forced Dany and William into a deadly confrontation. Completely unaware, the 2 brothers still arrived at Clark's territory as scheduled. The moment they stepped in, they sensed something was wrong. From the words of Clark's men, they learned the bad news. Dany handed Clark the $8 million as agreed, but the other party suddenly changed his terms, demanding $16 million instead. He even wanted to keep the 2 hostages in the vehicle. Hearing this, Dany could no longer tolerate it. Handing over all the money to Clark would be no different from working for free. In the end, after some negotiation, Clark agreed to take only the $8 million, but still demanded the 2 hostages. This time, however, William refused. Everyone knew that if Clark kept the hostages, they would suffer greatly. The brothers got into a fierce argument over this, neither willing to back down. Blinded by anger, they decided to go their separate ways. Just as they were about to make a move on William, Dany still stepped in to stop it. He hinted for William to shoot Clark's man on the left. At the same time, Victor awoke in a daze. His hand brushed against a gun beside him. It turned out that when Mark had placed him on the stretcher, the gun had accidentally fallen underneath him. Fearing the robbers outside might cause trouble, Camille grabbed the gun to guard the vehicle door. However, in her extremely tense state of mind, when she saw someone step in, she fired. When she snapped out of it, William had collapsed to the ground, barely clinging to life. Seeing the severity of his younger brother's wound, Dany, in a panic, stopped caring about anything else. He immediately drove toward the hospital, but Clark's men would not let them go, blocking the entrance to exact revenge for their boss. This large-scale brawl successfully drew the attention of the police. They drove in and resumed the chase. Inside the ambulance, before losing consciousness, William handed 2 bundles of cash to Camille, asking her to give them to his wife. 10 minutes later, the ambulance finally arrived at the hospital. The moment it stopped, they were completely surrounded by police vehicles. Snipers on the rooftops were already in position to fire. Seeing William on the brink of death, Dany sank deep into regret. At that moment, he suddenly noticed the gun on the floor and immediately questioned Victor as to whether he was the one who had fired. With no other choice, Camille admitted that it was she who had wounded William. In a rage, he grabbed Camille and threatened the police not to make any rash moves, or he would blow off both Camille's and Victor's heads in front of everyone. He shouted to the police that William was a good man, and that the one who deserved to die was himself. But before his words had even faded, a gunshot suddenly rang out. No one expected that the shot had been fired by William. The police immediately rushed in and subdued the 2 men. At that moment, the 2 brothers who had grown up together looked at each other in this way. Then, William's wife hurried to the scene, crying and pleading with everyone to save her husband. Seeing this, Camille ignored the police's attempts to stop her and rushed to William's side. She persuaded Mark to transfer him to another ambulance. Taking advantage of the moment when no one was paying attention, she secretly tucked the money William had given her into his wife's baby stroller. In the end, after receiving emergency treatment, William pulled through. When cooperating with the police investigation, Victor did not identify who had shot him, only emphasizing that William had saved him. This is where the story ends. If any of you are interested, you can look for the original version of the movie Ambulance. That concludes today's story. Thank you for watching. What did you think of the movie? Leave a comment below.